know, us humans, we've been pretty busy these past few millennia. Since whenever it was we stopped dragging our knuckles on the ground and made the great leap forward from chimpanzee to Homo sapiens. We've made a lot of mischief, that's for sure. We've also created some pretty cool gear, which kind of got me thinking. Thousands of years from now, when learned scholars gaze back and try to list the most important, transformative, world-changing inventions in the history of humanity, what's likely to make the cut? The electric light bulb? The steam engine? The internal combustion engine? The airplane? The automobile? And of course, sliced bread. But right up there in the pantheon, alongside all that stuff, is a more recent breakthrough, a new invention that came out of nowhere.
The invention in question is, of course, the World Wide Web, an amazing and surreal universe that spawned huge fortunes, upended countless industries, and changed the way that much of the world works, plays, communicates, shops, and even falls in love.
My name's John Heilemann, and I'm here to tell you the story of the web's rise from obscurity to global ubiquity. It's a tale I know like the back of my hand, because as a journalist, I had a ringside seat for the whole shebang.
For more than a decade, I was right here in Silicon Valley, witnessing up close the moments that shaped the internet age.
That age began with a vicious power struggle to decide who would control the future of the just emerging web.
Jim Clark starts literally pounding the table, and he's like, we have to take this thing public. We have to take it public right now.
Close of trading, I had made $663 million.
A struggle that would end with an epic courtroom battle.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
And that would forever be remembered as the browser war.
We were like a deer in the headlights with Microsoft in front of us, so, you know, what do we do? What do we do?
It was all hands on deck. This is not a drill.
They're going to crush us. They're going to crush us.
We have to destroy this company.
The amazing tale of how the internet took over the world begins in the over-fertile imaginations of a group of penniless, mini-golf loving undergraduate computer nerds from the University of Illinois.
Who lived in a strange new unexplored space, a place called cyberspace.
Back in 1993, these guys were fascinated by an obscure scientific research network called the World Wide Web, invented in 1989 by an English scientist called Tim Berners-Lee.
Having grown up with this kind of technology at our fingertips, it was hard to imagine being without. And you would talk to the average Joe on the street, they would have no idea. Because it's one of these technologies that you don't know you need until you start using it.
Now today we're all used to the web with its fancy video and graphics and sound, where one mouse click can send us rolling down a new path. Who knows where you'll end up?
But back then, the web was very different. There were precious few web pages, and they consisted of nothing but line after line of boring text. There was hardly anything worth finding, and no way to find it anyway.
You had to be a big-time geek to get all excited about this thing.
But one of those geeks, a visionary University of Illinois computer science student named Mark Andreessen, had a crazy idea. He imagined a future where everyone, including regular people like you and me, would use the web as part of our daily lives.
Andreessen worked in a cubicle near me, and he was working on a different product, and then he got all wild-eyed about this thing called the web.
The internet at that point was really only for nerds. It was really only for academics and researchers and scientists, and there wasn't anything that ordinary people could do on it. But it was so useful to the people who were using it that I always figured everybody should be able to use it.
But he was like, yeah, man, this stuff is going to change the world. It'll be great. You know, it's global hypermedia. And so I was just like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Andreessen may have been the most excitable, but soon enough, he and a bunch of his college programming pals were working on making the web easier and more intuitive to use, adding images, pictures, audio, and video capabilities.
The fruit of their labors was this: a dead simple piece of point-and-click software, the world's first graphical web browser. And every time you surf the internet today, you're using one of its descendants.
In the fall of 1993, the Illinois geeks posted Mosaic online and made it a freely downloadable gift to humanity. And what a gift it turned out to be.
Well, we first posted the announcement on a newsgroup, on a Usenet newsgroup at that point, and I just said, does anybody want to be part of a beta effort? And I got back 12 responses, and so I sent the browser to 12 people. And then it just spread virally from there. So it spread from 12 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000 to 1 million.
This was the moment when the internet went from obscurity to ubiquity, from a toy for geeks and a tool for scientists to a bona fide mass medium. A bunch of 20-something, code-crunching, burger-guzzling kids had kick-started a revolution. But before Mosaic could go truly global and imperil Bill Gates and Microsoft, it needed one more ingredient, a giant, heaping pile of cash.
This extremely expensive building was a gift to Stanford University from this man, one of its former professors, Jim Clark.
A poor kid from West Texas, Clark was a high school dropout who turned himself into a computer science professor at Stanford, then founded a company called Silicon Graphics that made him a legend in the Valley. He had a taste for fast cars, expensive wine, and mid-air death-defying antics, like flying a stunt plane. The first time we met, in fact, he took me on a helicopter ride and nearly killed us both.
But having just left Silicon Graphics, Clark was looking for something new, something big. And when he saw Mosaic, he quickly became convinced that he'd found it.
I had spent a lot of years thinking about the convergence of different kinds of media with digital technology. And so it just sort of crystallized in my mind that the internet and the World Wide Web were going to be the thing that ushered in that convergence. In fact, once the epiphany happened, there was no turning back. I was willing to bet, and in fact did bet, a third of my net worth on this concept.
Wasting no time, Clark contacted Mark Andreessen, who had graduated from college and hightailed it out of Illinois straight to a job in Silicon Valley.
February '94, I'm at work and I get an email from Jim Clark saying, I'm thinking of starting a new software company. Do you want to get together and talk? So I said, well, this is interesting. So I broke my normal rule of not getting up before noon and got up and had breakfast with him at 7 a.m.
In the months that followed, Mark and Clark became inseparable as they plotted how to turn Mosaic into the basis of a business venture.
But this obviously wasn't something that they could do by themselves. They needed a team. And soon they were on a plane for Illinois on a recruiting trip that would spark the start of the internet age.
We hopped on a plane and arrived late one evening and met everyone at a pizza parlor and sat there and had a beer and some pizza and just kind of talked about generally what we thought.
Well, I think we were all a little intimidated, to tell the truth, because he was this big Silicon Valley guy, relatively famous, had founded a very large computer company. Everyone knows he's got a lot of money, and he's coming out here, and he listened.
I didn't have a concept of how we would make money at the time, but it's like so many other things. If there are that many people using something, and it had grown to 1 million users in a period of 9 months, there's going to be a way to make money out of it. But these guys had no clue.
What Clark cared about right now was getting the Illinois geeks on board, so he made them an offer beyond their wildest dreams.
Each of us comes back a little starry-eyed, a little dazed, and for me, just in junior year of university, I was just like, getting a full-time job offer before I've even graduated for that kind of money, it's like, oh, wow, yeah, man, why would I turn that down,
In hindsight, it might seem obvious that the web browser would change the world. But although Jim Clark may have grasped that insight, most people didn't, including the one person you would have expected to get it immediately, Bill Gates. Gates, of course, was the co-founder and CEO of Microsoft, the most important and fantastically profitable high-tech company of them all. Over the course of 2 decades, Microsoft had established a near monopoly over PC operating systems, and had used that monopoly to gain a vice-like grip over the entire computer industry. The web was cyberspace as a wide-open road, fast-moving and exhilarating, and it would take you absolutely anywhere that your curiosity led you. But Bill Gates thought that the information highway should be a toll road, on which Microsoft controlled all the toll booths, and we would all have to pay to drive. Thanks a lot.
Gates' online system was called, surprise, surprise, the Microsoft Network. And in 1994, lots of smart people assumed that he would succeed in foisting down the world, like he usually did.
Here was the information superhighway that futurists had been predicting for years. And although Gates didn't realize it yet, his worst nightmare was about to come true. A gang of kids as young and ambitious as he himself had once been were about to threaten everything he stood for and everything that Microsoft had achieved.
Brilliant, the spectacle that obsessed with computers since his boyhood, Bill Gates' journey to becoming the most powerful figure in technology began in 1975 when, at the age of 19, he dropped out of Harvard to start Microsoft with his high school pal, Paul Allen.
Gates' vision was simple and wildly ambitious. A PC on every desktop in every home and every office, and every one of those PCs running Microsoft software.
By 1993, his dream was tantalizingly close to becoming reality. About 90% of the world's PCs were running Microsoft Windows. This spectacular success had turned Microsoft into a veritable money machine, raking in billions of dollars in profits and turning thousands of Microsoft employees into stock option millionaires. Gates and the army that he'd amassed on Microsoft's sprawling campus in suburban Seattle worked insanely hard, and they played very rough with their rivals. The company's rise had left a trail of corpses in its wake. There was Lotus, there was WordPerfect, there was Borland, there was Novell, even mighty IBM, all brought to their knees.
Gates was now one of the richest and most influential men on earth, and he knew it. One night at a dinner party, he and some friends were discussing the election of Bill Clinton as president, and Gates blurted out, "I have as much power as the president does." His wife kicked him under the table when she heard that, but the truth of it was, he might have been right.
To many, Gates's power was seductive, irresistible. If you were a young, hungry software engineer like Thomas Reardon or Hadi Partovi, or a seasoned executive like Sam Jadala, Microsoft was the place to be. A place where it didn't matter if you were handsome or athletic. A place where smartness, measured by the ability to crank out killer code, was the only thing that counted. In other words, nerd nirvana.
In the early 90s, Microsoft campus was a very dynamic culture. You'd have many of the smartest people in computer science at all different ages, but it was a surprisingly young company overall. The average age of the company was probably 26, 27.
Microsoft was not the biggest software company in the world, but in a weird way, it was the hottest, and it was clear. There was a vibe when you walked in the door, a kind of cockiness that perfused like every kind of job at Microsoft. It wasn't just the engineers.
I joined Microsoft in 1987, and this was a group of people who wanted to win. This was a group of people who were very aggressive about the competition.
Microsoft's behavior was certainly extreme, but it was driven less by arrogance than by fear and insecurity. Gates knew that at any moment, some puny little startup in a garage somewhere could rise up and topple Microsoft, just as they'd done to others. And along with his trusted lieutenant, Steve Ballmer, he was determined not to let that happen. Unlike Gates, the college dropout, Ballmer had actually been to business school. Where Gates was Microsoft's superego, skinny and cerebral, Ballmer was its raging id, beefy and emotional. But it was nothing compared to Gates himself, the smartest of the Microsoft smart guys, a brainiac who never suffered fools gladly, if he even suffered them at all.
That's ridiculous. I'm not doing this thing. No. Somebody's confused. Somebody's just not thinking. I mean, there's no way. You guys never understood. You never understood the first thing about this.
In all the times that I've met Gates, there's only been one consistent element. The moment when he looked at me and said that something I'd said was the stupidest thing he'd ever heard. And I didn't even work for the guy. But Thomas Reardon did. And he remembers his first meeting with Gates as one of the most unnerving experiences of his life.
He is not one known to throw out compliments. It was just sort of a, that's good, looks good. Yeah, we probably need to do more of this. And that was about the feedback that I felt like we got. And it wasn't that he was disinterested. I think I learned at the time, really, you feel like you've had a major victory if you haven't been shredded. If he hasn't called you an idiot 19 times. Guess what? You had a good Bill meeting.
With Microsoft's minions under his spell, billions of dollars in his bank account, and the launch of Windows 95 looming on the horizon, the Bill Gates of 1993 was on the verge of becoming the world's high-tech emperor. Less than 2 years later, though, Gates would be forced to make one of the sharpest U-turns in corporate history, because Clark, Andreessen, and their team were about to enter the picture and throw a giant roadblock in their path. Certain parts of the world have always been magnets for certain types of people. LA is for actors, Las Vegas is for gamblers, Paris is for artists. This 30-mile stretch between San Francisco and San Jose has always been a magnet for, shall we say, the technologically inclined. In the summer of 1994, this place had become home base for Jim Clark and his renegade band of young web browser pioneers. In the next few months, they would launch the fastest-growing software company the world had ever seen, Netscape Communications. Under the watchful eye of Clark,
the Netscape guys were adherents to the cause of spreading the reach of the still embryonic web, and hopefully getting rich in the process. But first, they had to deal with a severe case of culture shock.
I've never been out to California before, and when I got here, I was like, how come no one told me about this place before? This is the Mecca.
Yeah, this is kind of the Disneyland for geeks out here. It was also a brilliant move to take a bunch of guys, move them out of their home environments and just drop them into a new company because we didn't know anything else except work.
The plan was simple. Back in Illinois, the gang had created the first graphical web browser, Mosaic. Now they would work like maniacs to build a new browser based on that and turn the internet into the future of commerce and communication. Just another day at the office, right?
I think the mission as communicated to me and the rest of the group was to take over the world as quickly as possible. You know, nothing big, nothing really grand, just go out there and make software so compelling and so great that you'd have to be an idiot not to want it. That was the way Jim expresses things. It's like, there's no small goals. It's go out there and take over the world. And so we were all really pumped up to go out there and do something that was great.
But everyone at Netscape knew that time was of the essence. The web was becoming more popular with every passing day. The fear was that another, more powerful company would see its potential and launch a browser before Netscape had a chance to.
There was an extreme sense of urgency once we started, because we all knew that this wasn't a hard thing to do.
And they were right to be worried, because back in Seattle, even though Bill Gates still had his doubts about the web, some Microsofties were aware of Netscape. Thomas Reardon at one point contacted the young company to sniff around for information, and found that whatever their inner fears, Netscape gave off a different public vibe, one of supreme arrogance.
We were kind of aware of them at a distance, so called up and talked to an executive there and basically got told to go pound sand. And I was like, wow, like every company I called was like, wow, Microsoft's calling. Netscape, 15 minutes and just told me to not interested, and not just not interested, but don't even try calling back. When you're at Microsoft, you kind of get used to being kind of lords of the industry and everybody paying you some homage. At some point in time, nothing. It's clear that Netscape culturally already perceived Microsoft as the people to take out.
On the 13th of October, 1994, after months of feverish non-stop coding, Netscape's new web browser, Navigator, finally hit the streets. From this moment, conflict was inevitable, with Netscape cast as the upstart David and Microsoft as the mighty Goliath. Now, you might not think that David would have much of a chance in this fight, but from the moment Netscape's browser, Navigator, was launched, it was an instant runaway success.
The night of the first release, we set up in one of the conference rooms, we set up a computer to watch the downloads, and we had a sound effect where there'd be a cannon shot every time somebody downloaded the software. And, after a while, it sounded like a war, because there was just cannon shot, it's just continuous cannon shot.
Soon the web was spreading like wildfire around the globe. The internet age had truly begun, and it had nothing to do with Microsoft.
There was a point probably when Netscape got 1 million downloads, and suddenly we thought, what's going on?
1 million downloads? That's a pretty big number. But the truth is that Microsoft's worries about Netscape ran a lot deeper than its little browser. And to understand why requires just a little technical understanding. In the computer business, the companies that have the most power control what's known as a software platform. That's the software on which other programs run on top. With its near monopoly over the Windows operating system, Microsoft controlled the ultimate platform. It was the one on which the whole computer business rose and fell. And for years it was impossible to imagine that anyone could ever challenge its supremacy. But now Bill Gates' many rivals in Silicon Valley began to imagine a different future. A future where the browser could be an alternative platform, one where you could carry out all your computing needs online, thereby leveling the playing field in the industry and rendering Windows, the most profitable software in the history of man, completely irrelevant.
Netscape's sudden success was impossible for Microsoft to ignore. Suddenly, Bill Gates got it. Not just the importance of the web, but the scale of his own strategic blunder and the need to rectify it right now. Late one night, Gates sat at his computer and pounded out a memo to his troops entitled, "The Internet Tidal Wave." he declared that the web was, quote, the single most important development in computing since the PC. And he wrote about Netscape as, quote, a new competitor born on the internet, a competitor that Microsoft absolutely had to, quote, match and beat, which meant to destroy.
This was a just complete take a right turn, everybody right now, starting not like next week or next month, but starting tomorrow, figure out how your job changes.
Bill's message to the company was, let's go find lots of ways for us to now engage in this new battle.
It was absolutely like a your country needs you, sort of every man, all hands on deck kind of call to action.
That's probably, you could argue, the beginning of the browser.
In 1993, the internet was unknown and unloved outside a tiny circle of hardcore computer hackers and scientists. But by 1995, the situation had changed dramatically. Now, thanks to the wizardry and the manic energy of a bunch of engineers here in Silicon Valley, the internet was becoming a full-scale phenomenon, a technology being compared in its importance to television and the printing press. Leading the charge was Netscape. Its browser was quickly becoming the gateway to the web for millions of people. The company had just hired a respectable CEO, and revenues were rolling in. The future looked incredibly rosy, or did it?
This man certainly didn't think so. His name is Gary Reback, a well-known antitrust lawyer in Silicon Valley who back in the summer of 1995 was limbering up for the fight of his life. Like many in the Valley, he knew that Bill Gates would be coming after the internet, and he knew better than most, from a career of clashing with Microsoft on behalf of his Valley clients, that when Gates came after your business, one thing was certain: there would be blood. Now Reback had been hired by Netscape, and right away he saw that the young company had grossly underestimated the threat that it was facing.
Netscape's business plan assumed that Microsoft would either obey the law or someone would force them to obey the law. Now, I suppose that's not an unreasonable assumption. After all, if you start a business, you don't expect a competitor to just burn your plant down. You don't expect a competitor to go to your distributors and threaten to put them out of business if they carry your product. But you know what? That's exactly what Microsoft did.
The problem for Netscape was that Microsoft and Bill Gates now perceived the young company to be the primary threat to their continued dominance. In the opening salvo of the high-tech war, Gates dispatched a special group of envoys, including Thomas Reardon, for a face-to-face powwow behind enemy lines here at what back then was Netscape's corporate headquarters. What resulted was a meeting that would be one of the most controversial in the history of modern business. That the Microsoft-Netscape meeting took place here, that much we know for sure. But what actually happened behind closed doors remains the subject of intense and bitter debate. The Microsoft version goes something like this.
We go down there in June of 95, and we had this free roaming discussion with them about how we would work with Netscape. How would we work with them on web servers and on browsers, and how we might use, how Microsoft Word could work with Netscape software, etc. It was a broad discussion that went on, I think, for like 6 hours, a whole day of discussions. It was interesting. I thought it was a really collegial, easygoing meeting.
Hey, that doesn't sound so bad. But Netscape's version of events was just a little bit different.
They came to the meeting and they made him an offer. And the offer was, I win and maybe you're there, or I win and you're not there at all. Those are the two choices, basically. It was kind of like that scene from The Godfather. I mean, Netscape got made an offer they couldn't refuse.
I was a baby, and me and some of the other kids there went down and, yeah, Godfather-style threatened Netscape. It's absurd. It's absurd on its face.
Microsoft offered us $1 million for unlimited access to all our technology, and it'd be a one-time fee. So essentially they said, we'll buy your whole business for $1 million. Take it or leave it, because if you leave it, we're just going to copy everything you do.
I remember thinking at the time, if this isn't illegal, it should be.
If what Netscape claimed was true, it meant that Microsoft had broken the law, American antitrust law to be precise. The point of that law was to constrain the behavior of companies that held monopolies, which most sane experts agreed Microsoft had with its Windows operating system. Within hours of the meeting, Netscape instructed Gary Reback to alert the U.S. Justice Department about what had taken place and to start laying the groundwork for a lawsuit against Microsoft. But Thomas Reardon smelled a rat.
Why did Netscape have antitrust counsel? Not just any antitrust counsel, but the legendary Gary Reebok, the guy known, famous, for going after Microsoft for years, trying to stir up a government suit against Microsoft. You know, effectively we had been had. The meeting had been set up.
A paranoid theory? No doubt. At the time, Netscape was the hottest young company in high technology. So why would it need to try and set up Microsoft? On Wall Street, analysts and bankers had begun to sing its praises, talking about the bright prospects ahead if Netscape were to launch an IPO.
I looked at our projections for Netscape and realized that there was a chance that Netscape could be the fastest growing software company ever.
Jim Clark starts literally pounding the table and he's like, we have to take this thing public. We have to take it public right now. And everybody in the room was like, really? Like, are you sure?
What was fascinating about those early days is the growth numbers were extraordinary.
You could just almost predict that we were going to have something between 60 and 80 million in revenues for the year.
Now hold on here. Wait a minute. Let's think about this. Before Netscape, the standard rule on Wall Street was that a company needed to have at least a year, and preferably 2, of strong and growing profits before it could even think about going public. But Netscape in August of 1995 had only been in existence for a year. It didn't have a dime of profits, and it had no idea how it was going to make them. And as Jim Clark told me at the time, the only reason that he wanted to go public so fast was because he needed a giant windfall so he could build the world's biggest computerized yacht. So under these circumstances, going public was lunacy for Netscape, right? Certainly that's what most of the company's employees thought.
Wrong. On the day of the IPO, Netscape stock went through the roof, igniting the internet boom that would rage for the rest of the decade.
I was on the trading floor, and I went over to talk to our trader, David Slane, and Matt DeSalvo, who ran our trading desk, literally stepped in front of me and prevented me from getting close to Dave. And I said, what's going on? And he said, there's a lot of volume in the trading of the shares, and Dave needs all the focus that he has.
And you start saying, biggest IPO ever, biggest rise, like all this crazy stuff. I'm like, wow, people really like us, I guess.
I invested $5 million in the company, and on the day of the IPO, at the close of trading, I had made $663 million.
High on their own fumes, the Netscapies began to think they were invincible. They treated even their allies with arrogant indifference. And as for their enemies, one in particular, they violated one of Silicon Valley's cardinal rules: don't moon the giant. Back in the days when no one would give the finger to Microsoft, here was Mark Andreessen in the press over and over, heaping scorn on the company.
Mark Andreessen was very clear on many occasions that he didn't think much of Microsoft, he didn't think much about the quality of Microsoft software, and he thought that Windows was dead.
Windows is going to be a bag of poorly debugged device drivers was one of his sort of most notable quotes.
A poorly debugged set of device drivers? What does that even mean? To people who speak English like you and me, it doesn't sound so bad. But if you're an engineer, the kind of person who speaks geek, Mark Andreessen's comment was the equivalent of a slur on Bill Gates' mother. And it played straight into Gates' hands, spurring Microsoft on in their burgeoning war against Netscape.
For the developers in Windows, who were some of the best developers in the world, to have their baby thought of as a set of poorly debugged device drivers was maddening. And it was insulting, and it got them motivated.
I actually personally postered the walls of our hallways with pictures of the top executives from Netscape and some of the quotes that they made simply to motivate people to know, these are the faces of the people you're fighting against.
Then you started actually reading articles where people are like, Netscape, the new Microsoft? Like, no, we're the Microsoft. We're the new Microsoft.
On December 7th, 1995, Gates let the world know that he had Netscape in his sights. Microsoft planned to drive Clark and Andreessen's startup to an early grave with a web browser of its own, Internet Explorer.
Microsoft hastily arranged a press and analyst meeting in Seattle. They did it by design on the anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and it was called the Pearl Harbor Day, and the view was they were going to attack Netscape with all that they could.
Everybody at Microsoft, every last group, every last product was lined up and focused against Netscape. We could say it was focused on the internet, but it was against Netscape. That was it. It was everything. It was all hands on deck. This is not a drill. We have to destroy this company.
With traffic on the information highway accelerating rapidly, Gates had pulled out all the stops, pouring millions of dollars into the web and turning Internet Explorer into a do-or-die cause at Microsoft. The sleeping giant had awakened, was how he put it, and now Netscape was about to find itself in a world of trouble.
So maybe, just maybe, it had been a mistake to moon that giant and get its dander up. Maybe Andreessen should have been just a little bit less confrontational.
If you want to explore that with other people, I'm fine with it. Okay. But I think I'll take a pass.
Andreessen announcing that Windows would be irrelevant was probably not such a hot idea.
I think they just got their dander up and decided we're going to smack them in the head.
Despite Netscape's head start, Microsoft's Internet Explorer team had some real advantages. Vast financial resources and reserves of coding talent, and a leader, Bill Gates, who was willing to do anything, up to and including breaking the law, to annihilate Netscape, the fresh-faced company that now ruled the web, captured the public's fascination, and threatened to finally undermine Microsoft's rule of fear.
I remember going back to college and talking to some friends and telling them that, I was working on building a Microsoft competitor to Netscape, and people just laughing at me, thinking, what are you thinking? There's no way.
Our psychology, if you will, in the Internet Explorer team, maybe even the Windows team in '95, was that we were behind.
In 1995, people didn't even differentiate the web from Netscape. They would say, I'm going to go browse Netscape. They wouldn't say, I'm browsing the World Wide Web or the Internet. The word for that thing was Netscape.
Microsoft's plan was straightforward. Analyze Netscape's every move and imitate it. Release version after version of Internet Explorer and slowly chip away at Netscape's lead in browser market share, 1 percentage point at a time.
My typical day was I'd get up, feed the kids breakfast, maybe take them to daycare, get to work around, let's say, 9:30 in the morning, and then I'd stay till 3:30 in the morning. I'd come home, get about 4 hours of sleep, get up, have breakfast, take kids, go to work, and then work 9:30 to 9:30.
We didn't get any extra pay compared to other Microsoft employees. We were just scared for our product would lose.
And it wasn't just the engineers who were working as if their lives depended on it. Gates also had at his disposal another formidable weapon, his shadowy army of salesmen. Secretive, relentless, and sometimes underhanded, their mission was clear: to put Netscape Navigator out of business by whatever means necessary, to cut off its air supply, as one Microsoftie put it, and to shove Internet Explorer down the throat of every Microsoft customer.
The people who sold software to PC manufacturers were like a dark cult of people who you just knew just kept making money in ways that maybe we didn't even want to know how they were making money. They're like ninjas. They're like, you don't ask them what they do. They go in and they do these deals. They're $500 million deals. These are big multi-year sales deals. And they would do whatever it is they did, and I didn't want to know, and people around me didn't want to know.
Gates' army of silent salesman assassins used all kinds of sharp-edged tactics to stop PC manufacturers from installing anything other than Internet Explorer.
They had told Compaq that if they distributed our browser, that Microsoft would cancel the Windows license. Well, Compaq couldn't be in business without the Windows license, so therefore they weren't going to distribute our browser.
Whatever else might be said about Microsoft's dirty pool, it was working. As both companies went head-to-head with version after version of their browsers, the market share of Internet Explorer steadily grew, and Netscape started to feel Microsoft breathing down its neck.
Your room for mistake is 0. You sleep one deadline, the guy is right on your heels, right? So so it was hard.
We're like a deer in the headlights with Microsoft in front of us, so, what do we do? What do we do? They're going to crush us. They're going to crush us.
Netscape's sense of impending doom was heightened by one final factor. If the company was going to live up to its potential, it needed to make profits, so every dime of revenue was precious. But Microsoft had billions of dollars in the bank, which let it do something extraordinary. Rather than charging money for its web browser, as Netscape had to, Microsoft was able to give Internet Explorer away for free, bundled and seamlessly integrated into the Windows operating system.
With IE4, it was over. I mean, it wasn't, oh, we're going to win. With IE4, we had 80+% of all browser users, everybody.
By September 1997, the browser war was over. Microsoft had emerged triumphant. Netscape was reeling, its business on the ropes, its very survival in doubt. To mark the launch of Internet Explorer 4, Bill Gates decided to throw a party for the software warriors who'd created his new browser. But rather than throwing it here in Seattle, he decided that the more delicious venue would be here in San Francisco, the very heart of Netscape territory.
During the celebration that followed, Thomas Reardon and his drunken colleagues noticed a 9-foot-tall Internet Explorer E symbol standing in the lobby of the party venue and were seized by a devilish, if inebriated, idea.
We hoisted that big, huge, I don't know, several hundred-pound E up onto this truck and couldn't really get it roped down to the truck at all.
Having secured the giant E in the back of a truck, the drunken Microsofties paid a driver to take them down Highway 101 into Silicon Valley. Then they dumped it here in the Netscape fountain and staggered their way back to the hotel.
So I came into work, and here's this giant E on the front lawn, and the people start strolling in, and everyone's talking about the E. And
it was seen at the time, at least by me, as not a movement of strength by Microsoft, but a movement of weakness, of like a kind of neener, you know, we can do this, you know, look, we can stick something on your lawn.
A juvenile prank? Absolutely. But a fitting symbol, too. From that point on, it was all downhill for Netscape. A year later, its market share now in single figures and dwindling, the company that ushered in the internet age was acquired by a bigger, but much uncooler company, AOL.
You know, there was a sense that we were building something to last, and then at that point, seeing it get rolled into AOL, it's just like, you know what? It's gone. That's it. It's not going to last. And that was pretty hard.
Jim Clark, too, was bummed about Netscape's demise, but he had a few, or rather a few million, ways to console himself.
I invested $5 million in the company, and in the end made close to $2 billion, and that's a little bit more return than you need.
All of the original Netscape engineers made their millions too, but in the end were left to ponder what might have been.
You know, we were no saints either.
Oh, we were much better than that.
We were much better, yes.
We would have been benevolent rulers.
No, we would have been evil. I just know that now, but I mean, we never got the chance to be truly evil.
Jim Clark and his gang of coding misfits may have been defeated, but at least for them, the war was over. For Microsoft and Gates, however, quite the opposite was true. Now they were about to face a foe far larger and more implacable than Netscape. It was an enemy unlike any that Gates had ever tangled with before. It didn't reside in Silicon Valley, and it barely knew software from sausages. But it would threaten to tear Microsoft in two. The enemy was the United States government, which had come to believe that Gates wasn't a hero, but a kind of high-tech terrorist. It's 1998, and the United States Department of Justice, prodded by Microsoft's enemies in Silicon Valley, and particularly by Netscape and their Rottweiler lawyer, Gary Reback, has launched a historic antitrust lawsuit against Bill Gates' company. The government has accused Microsoft of using its Windows monopoly to engage in a wide variety of predatory and exclusionary business practices to prevent consumers from accessing Netscape's products and thus to put the pioneering startup 6 feet under.
How does precluding Netscape from being distributed by computer makers help consumers? It can't possibly help consumers. Doesn't help Netscape. The only person it helps, the only entity it helps is Microsoft. That's clearly over the line.
Now, with Microsoft's future hanging in the balance, the man who had declared himself as powerful as the president saw his company hauled into court, accused of being law-breaking miscreants, and had himself been forced to endure a marathon videotaped deposition.
They had asked him questions and filmed his answers before the trial. And I think this was something new for Bill Gates, somebody asking him real hard questions that he couldn't refuse to answer.
You type in here importance : high.
No.
No?
No, I didn't type that.
Who typed in high?
A computer.
Here was the world's richest man, as the public had never seen him before. Petulant and passive-aggressive, obfuscatory and obscurantist, as a quibbler, a pedant, an amnesiac, a baby.
I've never seen a stamp like that. I've never used a stamp like that.
Haven't you seen stamps like that in every single one of the documents that you've been shown during this deposition?
Can you get me all the exhibits?
Just a waste of time. It is a waste of time.
I have no idea what you're talking about when you say ask.
And so he came across in those tapes as not quite being truthful.
In court, the government showed Gates on screen, denying any knowledge of the infamous June 1995 meeting with Netscape, saying indeed at the time, quote, "I had no sense of what Netscape was doing." But then the court was shown an email sent by Gates to some of Microsoft's top brass a few weeks before the meeting, outlining his strategy for dealing with Netscape. Gates declared that he thought there was, quote, "a powerful deal to be done with Netscape," and that maybe Microsoft should, quote, "buy a piece of them or something," adding that he, quote, "would really like to see this happen."
Did we have people who pushed it and did deals that probably in retrospect they shouldn't have? I would say, yeah, I think that we did. That made it very tough on our competitors because we took advantage of our position. And clearly, unfortunately, that's what, became the dark cloud over Microsoft.
The federal judge in charge of the Microsoft case issued his final verdict. Guilty, guilty, guilty. And he recommended that the company be broken up, causing its stock market value to plunge by $30 billion overnight. The verdict brought the highest kite's Internet Explorer team crashing down to earth. But it was even harder on Gates himself. The trial had taken a tremendous toll on Microsoft's boss. It wore him out, beat him down, made him physically sick. At one point, I was told by some Microsoft board members, Gates had even broken down in tears at a company board meeting. Eventually, however, a federal appeals court, though it agreed with the judgment that Microsoft had indeed systematically broken the law, decided the verdict was too harsh and rescinded the order to split the company in two.
To many people, it seemed as if Microsoft had gotten away with murder yet again. But now, a few years later, standing here at Stanford in front of the Gates Computer Science Building, ironically just around the corner from the building that Jim Clark paid for, the story doesn't seem quite that simple.
As the trial concluded, Gates handed over his position as Microsoft's CEO to his number two, Steve Ballmer. And soon he began to focus more and more of his time and effort on his philanthropic interests, housed at the Gates Foundation. What's clear is that very much like J.D. Rockefeller, that robber baron of an earlier age, Gates may wind up changing the world as much with his charity work as he did at Microsoft.
What's equally clear is that Microsoft is no longer the force it once was. The cowboy swagger and bravado that defined the company in its golden years is gone. Although Microsoft won the browser war, the revolution sparked by Netscape unleashed a new generation of startups, companies like Google, that have made Microsoft look old and clueless and lumbering, just as Microsoft and Gates made IBM look 2 decades ago. And so an eternal lesson of the high-tech world has been proven true again. Even the most powerful empires can disappear in one click.